Up next is AASHTOWare Project at MnDOT, Joint Construction and Materials Functionality, Current and Potential. We have a few people here who are going to be participating in this. Let me start the presentation up. All righty. So we have Alan Gallistel from the Chem Lab, Jenny Carlson, Construction Documents and Payment Supervisor, Jessica Menenga, Construction Documents and Payment Specialist, Rachel Teague, Lead Business Analyst, and myself, Infotech PM. Welcome to this afternoon session. Jenny, it's ready for you. Let me make sure you're on here.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. Yeah. So we mentioned earlier that the office managers assign specific contract authority for roles that people already have. So a lot of times we will assign authority to all contracts administered in an administrative office, which is the same as a resident office. However, in some instances, we require contract-specific authority, such as for temporary workers, which would include summer help, grad engineers, workers who are working on a contract administered by a different office than what they normally work in, consultants, or we also need to assign contract-specific authority for people using mobile inspector. So the office manager signs that just because they are closer to the contract than central office staff, so they know who should be on that contract. And we do it through the contract authority tab on the contract administration summary. Okay, so we mentioned administrative office authority, and so central office assigns the administrative office to a user so that they can have access to those contracts in that office if we assign administrative office authority. The administrative offices in AASHTOWare, as far as construction is concerned, were set up the same way that they were set up in the legacy system in the past. So it has the same hierarchy. And a contract is assigned to an administrative office based on the engineer of record to the contract and the resident office in which they work. So when the contract is signed, we say who the engineer of record is. Typically it's the resident engineer of any given resident office.
Thank you. And that brings us to how administrative offices are used in materials with the sample record itself. It also has contract authority, so it uses a combination of a user's role, an administrative office, or all contract office for access to sample records. So that's where that tie-in fills into place. We have Alan as well. He's going to talk about the qualifications for us.
I'll say that last slide was so quick, I wasn't quite expecting that. So, you know, on these next couple slides, we'll be talking about the person qualifications. And earlier it was mentioned, you know, the distinction between person and user and the differences in what they can and can't do in the system at that point. There are, under the person qualification summary, there's ability to select as a sampler what they're able to do for sampling. And so those qualifications include things like the egg production, bit plant, bit street, and you can see the remainder of them listed there. And those qualifications are assigned based off the TechCert program or provisionals that are done by the IA. And then there is a case of a qualification which we labeled as no qual. And that refers to some materials, for example, traffic tape that's put down for striping at the end of the job. There's no training or qualification specific to sampling of traffic tape like there is for aggregate, for example. And so for an inspector to go to the contractor and grab a 10-foot piece of traffic tape, there's no qualification required for that sampling. But since it's being sampled, all persons in the system that are doing sampling need to have a qualification of some sort that matches up with the material in order to show up on the sampled by list on the sample record. And I believe that covers this slide. Moving then on to the next slide. There are also qualifications that revolve around testing, and this gives the people who are working in the labs or working in the field and doing the actual testing access to those particular tests to be able to enter in information on the agency views. And here again, the qualifications are listed. For example, in the chemical lab, there are two different lab units. There's the analytical lab and the binder lab. And so the qualifications are split up based on those two lab units with training done for the lab technicians on the various tests. And once they are trained, they are assigned that qualification. Similarly, in the cement lab, you can see that there's a cement lab cube test that can be qualified for the technician, as well as, and some of the other cement lab ones are not showing up here, but here again, the ag production would qualify someone for running a gradation test, and that would be through Tech Cert. And so as it mentions down there, assigned to a person via Tech Cert or the lab unit supervisor through training. And with the forms that Nicole demonstrated earlier and adding persons to a system, we will be evaluating, how we potentially put that onto that request form as well. And then on to the next slide. On this slide, the qualifications also need to be set up for each individual lab. So here is a lab summary and the list of sampling qualifications for that lab area, as well as testing qualifications for that lab area. And in this case here, the cement lab cube is showing the other qualifications within the cement lab, such as the autoclave or curing compound and ASR. So those are some of the various qualifications under which a person in the cement lab can be trained and thus have access to those particular test methods.
Thank you, Alan. The next slide is on construction stockpiles, or another name for it or phrase is material on hand in Minnesota. And basically, right now, here you are using construction stockpiles in construction, and your screen looks like this. This is a screen from your production version right here, and for the construction stockpile. But you also see these fields here, but I don't think you have not been using them yet. In the future, you could, and this is an example of what it could look like. So this tie-in to a construction stockpile, it's basically identifying an approved quantity of material on this SMI record. It's been released with SMI, Source Material Identification. And if you want to use that, so you identify the material of that construction stockpile, identify the source who's supplying that material for that construction stockpile, and you could even tie it to an SMI record if you would like to. which that's being reviewed still, but it could be for like a batch of material or like over in a lot if you have some material that's been prepaid for and it's sitting there, but you want to make sure it's been tested first. This is how you can tie that together. And so the SMI record can actually go through a process in the daily source report, production material, SMI record, where you actually tie a sample and test it through that way if you would like to. And that's to be looked at for in the future. So that's where the construction stockpile functionality ties into the materials functionality. Rachel?
Yes. So these screens
I'm going to give you control on my computer. Okay, you have control.
Ultimate cosmic power. Right. So these screens are showing what we refer to as contract materials and acceptance actions. This is just your list of materials that are associated to a particular work item. We group them into material sets, and each of them can have individually maintained acceptance requirements for those materials. And what you're seeing here are the screens. One on the left is your materials tab, and that shows you your list of materials that are associated to the work item. And then the screen on the right shows an expanded version of that material that's underneath that item's material set. You can indicate the source that is either providing that material or performing work. You see a field that's called conversion factor. The conversion factor is how we transform the items unit into the materials unit. So if you're talking about square yards of a work item, how many cubic yards of the associated material does it take to make the 1 square yard? And you also see these other fields here that refer to how much we estimate we'll use throughout the life of the contract, how much has actually been installed, and how much we currently say at this time is satisfied amount of that material. You're able to maintain materials very granularly here on the contract. So you can add material sets, you can add new materials to the material set. And I'm not sure, is the next screen acceptance actions, Gina?
Yes, it is.
I'll click and we'll see. We'll all find out. I should know this though, but it's not.
It definitely is.
Yeah. It's not, oh, there we go, okay. Right, so the next tab is the set of requirements for those materials that are required for material acceptance. And you'll see this very long-term acceptance actions for project line number material set materials, or we also call it sometimes contract project item material set material. And each of these acceptance actions are set up to be looking for potentially different types of records that can satisfy that requirement. We kind of touched on it a little bit when we talked about the mobile apps. So we have 3 types of records that can count towards contract acceptance. 2 of them are filled out right on the daily work report. So you have a daily work report acceptance record, where it can either be looking for a particular value on a field inspection value field, which comes from a code table. And an example here is visual inspection of material. Some other ones we have for MnDOT specifically, I believe, are sand check, water check. There are many others. The other way that you can use a daily work report acceptance record for acceptance is to populate an agency view off of that acceptance record. And again, we talked about it a little during the mobile application. We'll talk about it a lot more later, but agency views are just screens where MnDOT gets to decide the fields that are important and any calculations that you want to have included. And this can be used for things like truck tickets and certifications and all kinds of other things, maybe field tests that are performed in the field that you don't want to have to create a sample record for, possibly, things like this. And then the third type of record you can use are your sample record tests for acceptance. So these are examples of each of those various things. Here we're looking at the CAA is contract acceptance action, and here we're looking for the daily work report acceptance record, and it's looking for that particular match of a field inspection value coming from a code table. So on the left-hand side, you see where it's setting up the requirement. This is your acceptance action on the left, where it's got a rate and a frequency with a frequency type. So in this case, we're looking for a daily work report, and we need one per day. So on the right-hand side, we have our daily work report, and we've installed material on that date, which I'm going to get really close to my screen to see what the date is, May 7th, 2020. So we're looking to match the date, May 7th, because we've installed that material that day. We need a correlating record for that. And here we have an acceptance record for that material with our field inspection value there populated to be visual inspection. And then this is the other way that you can accept material off of an acceptance record with an agency view. This is a very simple agency view. The right-hand side shows how you would access that agency view, and you can see right there off the row action menu, it's highlighting the concrete water check. That's the name of that agency view. And then down below, we're displaying that very tiny, very simple agency view, just 2 text boxes. But that's all that you need for a concrete water check. Could be as simple or as complex as you want it, and MnDOT runs the gamut. And then lastly, our sample record. So here again, on the left, we are showing the requirement for the acceptance action. It's looking for a sample record. And then on the right at the top, we have an acceptance record. Off of your daily work report acceptance record for a particular material, you can create a sample record. So there's that row action menu on the right-hand side on the top. It's highlighting create new sample record. When you do that, a lot of fields, a lot of data that gets populated on the daily work report get brought over to the sample. So you don't have to do an entry, which is nice. But it'll bring over things like your sample type, the material. It's going to automatically create for you an association to that contract project item material set, which is being shown down below on the right-hand side. So the right-hand lower image is of the sample record, and you see that the contract tab is showing an association to that line item, where you can document more information about the work location, where the sample was taken, how much this sample represents for that work item. There's a lot more that we don't show here, but there are links back and forth between the DWR and the sample record. It's documenting the daily work report inspector as the sampler of this sample record. So lots of stuff happening under the covers. And yeah, so those are the ways that you can create samples and document material acceptance off of your daily work reports for contract acceptance. Also, if you were to create a sample record completely independently of a daily work report, just from scratch, you can still associate that sample to contract project items. You can do it to one or to many. So one sample can be representative of material that's being used on many items in one contract or across many different contracts, possibly from a source perspective for source certification and things like this.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Sorry. And then what we have next is also on the contract material and acceptance actions area. On the acceptance actions itself, you could bring up a view for previously used sources and facilities, and it'll bring up a component that lists the previously used sources or facilities that have been used, that have acceptance records for that selected contract project item material within its material set. So if you want to know that information, that's available as well. The contract item summary over on contract items. So you have like contract progress. You can access contract items at the top in the quick link. And when you see your contract items and you expand it open, they have a little bit of information here to do with materials or items that do not actually have materials on them. So for that, this little, if you expand open the item itself, look at the bottom information on the reference attributes, you'll see exempt from MAA. What this means is that this item does not have global acceptance actions created for it. And for a scenario of like mobilization or state aid lump sum, you probably will not have materials associated to it. So there is a report that you can create, and you can create it at many different levels, that will identify and show you which items on your contract do not have any global acceptance actions set up for it. So if you're at your beginning of your job, it's been awarded, and you run this report, it will show you that information. The next thing you do is you might want to contact someone in the central office or who maintains that area and identify, hey, we have these new items that were added to the item master list, share a database, and they don't have global acceptance actions set up for them. I'm getting ready to generate my contract to make contract acceptance actions, so I'd like to have those on there if they need it. So this report lets you know what those are. And that report can be ran at the item level, the reference item level at any stage. It can also be run on a proposal, so that while the proposal is being done, before it's even awarded, if there are materials like acceptance actions that need to be set up for new items added to the item master, they could be done in advance, and at the contract level. So that's very helpful. Notice this little box here though. So if there is material on an item, this here little box will show you the number of authorized samples for this contract item. So that's a little helpful information. Jenny.
Okay, so payment estimate exceptions. Every time a payment estimate is generated, AASHTOWare checks for certain things. There's 23 different things that they check for. MnDOT doesn't use all of them, and we don't use the one that's currently showing on the screen, the insufficient materials, whereby the system creates exceptions when acceptance actions for the estimates items materials haven't been satisfied after being evaluated by the quantity, record count, or both. Since materials isn't in production, we currently use change orders to process deductions for materials. And I think that's on the next screen.
Mm-hmm. I gave you remote access, Jenny.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
Okay, so we use change orders to document prices. We use a change order level 1, which is a change order that is documenting something already allowed by the contract. So if we have material failures, we use change order level 1 for that, and the contractors don't need to sign those change orders, but it's a way of documenting material failures. Now, we don't use it necessarily to document not enough testing on an item, but for actual material failures, we would take the deducts through a change order. We use a generic item that we call change order dollar, and we put in a unit price of 1, which allows the field staff flexibility as we have to write our change orders before the work occurs. And so if we had a multi-year project and we had a change order and we had some failures in the first year, they could continue making payout on the same change order without having to write a subsequent one for the same issue.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yep.
Now on the next tab, what we have is the Contract Progress Summary Mix Designs tab. So in MnDOT, you guys have not gone through creating mixed designs and associating them to contracts yet. However, this is a screen right here of what it looks like in MnDOT. With the mixed designs tab, you can see it, but there aren't any values on it. In the future, you could possibly have it to where your contracts that are using a mixed design can be added and assigned to a contract. So you know what mixed designs are used at a contract level. The next slide is on reports. And Jessica, if you'd like to talk about this a little bit or not. Yeah, there you go. This is beautiful. This is an amazing book.
Well, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So basically this is a book of reports for construction reports. And it kind of shows which roles, or I should say which reports are available to each role. And then it has a lot of hyperlinks within the report so that you can click on the report and then it will kind of walk you through step by step on how to run the report. It also will give a description of what the report is. And then there's another hyperlink that will take you to a sample of what the report looks like. And so this is on our external AASHTOWare construction, our construction tools website. And I forgot what I was going to say, but just check it out. And if you're just wondering what reports that are available to the role that you have, you can look on that document and find out.
Yeah, so it's like 85 pages in length. It has a lot of great information in it. That part. Alan, I added your name here to this one. The approved product list and the qualified products list for MnDOT. Adding sources and materials and products in AASHTOWare Project and maintaining the website manually. There is a ticketed modification request, TMR, that includes enhancement requirements to add the brand name to a sample record, which is really cool, and enforce brand name required. It also includes when you have a source material, brand name, as well as its status and indication fields for each of the brand names for the material, which helps that as well, which will probably feed into the usage of your APL and QPL. Do you have anything else to add on that one, Alan?
Yeah, I guess I can add a couple thoughts regarding maintaining the website manually. You know, right now, essentially, the approved products website is being used to populate the source material associations for AASHTOWare. We may get to a point in the future where we decide to reverse that, in that as we add in new approved materials into AASHTOWare, we can potentially push that stuff the other way and populate our website. You know, one thing we currently are doing on our approved products website is we do offer a lot of other information on that site, such as documents regarding approval processes and review. And so if you've looked at any of the approved products sites for other agencies, some of them do just have, for example, a report similar to what AASHTOWare can generate that will just be 20, 30 pages of listing out materials groups and material names of what's approved versus a site like we currently have. And so, you know, there is opportunity to make some changes there depending on what direction we choose to go. And also you'll be seeing tomorrow when I do a demonstration of logging in samples and doing testing that with the approved products website and the list of materials such as concrete admixtures and also with cements, you know, both of which will be demonstrated tomorrow, only materials and brand names, in this case through the SMI on the sample record, can be selected if they are approved. So if something no longer is approved, we can make that selection inactive so that if someone is trying to sample that material and they are not able to select it, that indicates that that material either is not approved or is no longer approved.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alan. Okay, I'll move right along to the next one then. All right, right here what we have is an insufficient materials report. So right now, I think this is kind of similar to like the change order process. You're using that process to take care of like insufficient materials. And there's a report that's available in AASHTOWare Project that would calculate out what the insufficient material dollar amount would be based on the acceptance, on meeting the contract acceptance records. And, okay. And Rachel, do you have more detail about this report that you can share for us?
Sure. So what you'll see on this report is a breakdown of any item that has materials that have acceptance actions that are not satisfied for a pay estimate will show up here broken down by material set. So you'll see this report, there was only one item that didn't have all of its requirements met and only one material set for that item that didn't have its requirements met. And it shows you the conversion factor of the material that's driving it and details about what your actual satisfied quantity was, how much was installed, and how much that was left over that you were trying to pay on. So here we've got like a -25, which is -25 material units that you're trying to pay on. So that's how much will drive the withholding. It'll take that material unit and convert it back into item units to identify how much of that item pay we're gonna withhold. Again, MnDOT hasn't decided what they're going to do as far as automatic pay adjustments, but I'm pretty sure that the consensus is that we're not going to just accept the pay, we're going to override them, essentially. We won't accept the pay adjustment. So this report may not be particularly useful. There are other reports that show you more detailed look at what exactly was missing. This is really more about how a quantity to be withheld was determined.
Yeah. And also there's then an insufficient materials summit that just happened, I think, January or so, to go through the requirements of AASHTOWare Project in this area and how the system calculates insufficient materials. I don't know if Charlie or Rachel has any information on that.
I can talk about that a lot if you would like to know a lot of detail about it. But essentially, agencies are in consensus that the automatic pay adjustment is not calculating the way that they would expect that it should. And so we had, again, this time something more like 25 to 30 agency representatives. Alan came, Alan Gallistel was with us.
Alan.
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah.
I don't believe I was at that one, Rachel. I don't know, maybe
Oh.
Jenny or Jessica was?
Jessica and Mike and Charlie attended.
But that was the alternative contracting summit.
No.
No, it was insufficient materials.
Oh,
Ah.
well, wow.
Charlie was there.
That was
Jessica
December.
Was there.
So
Oh, December. Yeah, December. That was the one.
apologies,
Yeah,
I can't remember that far back.
Yeah.
And I
me
can tell you,
neither.
we have been looking at the TMRs that have come out of that, so we're looking to see what we can move forward with those too.
Yeah, a lot of that, there were something like 25 different enhancement requests or modifications that came out of the summit, and we've been estimating them and looking at how we can get those changes into the system.
Wow. So the schedule will mesh up. Eventually, it'll kind of like mesh up when that happens. There you go, Karen. Something to mesh through in the future. All right, thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the next slide, we have some sample labels and a label that was created for the CO lab unit, concrete admix chem. There's a lab sample label created for that lab for right now. There is another label here that the system creates. It's a sample label and does have a little bit of a bar on there for that. And there is some chatter and requirements with the Materials Technical Advisory Group very recently about barcodes and QR codes and having those in the system, to where you would use a reader to where you'd actually track the sample throughout its life. You can actually use them to actually track it. So there's been a lot going on there with that. So the payment estimate report, sorry, I skipped over that part. There is also a payment estimate reports in AASHTOWare Project that includes the material information, insufficient material, like exception information, insufficient materials. There's one for a general one, a contractor one for the project summary and summary by project, but MnDOT has its own custom report. You guys, and it meets your finance needs. And it looks like the legacy system. So that's the one that's out there that's being used. And I think that's it. Now, Jen, if you have anything else with that. Does it show, like, I don't remember what it looks like. Does it show the insufficient material? I guess with the change order, it probably wouldn't. How are the materials
No.
addressed in that report now? Okay.
They aren't.
Okay. So it's something to look for in the future, along with that previous slide on insufficient materials and change orders. Sounds like you guys have a pretty safe process there in place right now while this is in flux. Okay, thank you. The next one is very interesting. Gus, you might like this one. So this is the sampling and testing status report. And I just took a screenshot from one of the 19 pages. I only printed out for one item. That was in a demo site that I took this from, so there was a lot of information in there. Basically, this sampling and testing status report, it lets you know what the acceptance actions that are required for a contract, project, item, line number, material set, material, way down to that level. What are the acceptance actions needed? What are the field inspection values needed for a daily work report? What are the daily work report agency views needed? What are the sample record test methods and the sample types that are needed for that sample record? So it's going to say, hey, based on, for this material, for that item, based on the material that's been reported and placed, and the conversion factor from that item, based on that requirement. Like for instance, in this scenario, you need one record for every 1,000 units, but there's a minimum quantity required of 10 before that goes into place. You can set minimum requirements. Like, hey, you don't have to do this test for the first 500 units. After that, then you need it. And then so right here, it's going to say, hey, you need one record. And oh, here's the record that was created that actually meets that requirement. So here's a sample record that was created on the 7th of May that meets this requirement. It's going to say, you're good. You are good for that one. So you can run this report by item, or by multiple items, or by contract, or by multiple contracts, like a book. So, and you can access this from within inside of AASHTOWare Project, within inside of a contract, your items, or you can go into the global action reports and print it out for larger selections. There is a test results report. Let's see if Suzanne's on here. Yeah, I'm going to talk about like the test results report. It has been customized for Minnesota, MnDOT, and there is a reason, a good purpose for this is that there are cities and counties that are charged for the service, and it's actually a deliverable for the test results report for these scenarios. So there's been some effort put into the test results report to include the fields and the information needed for each of those tests for those materials. I'm pretty sharp. Examples, oops, go backwards. Okay, so examples of this included in the materials functionality in place at MnDOT demonstration session that Alan's given tomorrow. So you can see the test results reports in detail there a little bit more. Alan, do you have anything precursor to that?
No, I don't. I guess maybe I'll just comment, like it says here, the reports that are being developed for materials for the test reports are in a lot of ways set up and look a lot like the reports that we've been generating for years through LabVantage LIMS. And a lot of that has to deal with needing to send those reports out to cities and counties for the testing that we do as a service for them. You know, within AASHTOWare for a state project, when we get to that point of having all this information set up, and some of the earlier slides, like Gina mentioned, the materials testing summary report and some of those other reports potentially can be ran by the project engineer or others in construction to see that the materials have been tested, and you know, they may not necessarily need to have a report, a actual test report sent to them unless the project engineers are reading over every one of those admixture reports to verify that the pH is within range for the sample that was taken for use on their job. I would be surprised if anyone's ever looked at the pH value for an air and training admixture. They look to see that it met requirements. So, you know, there is the potential for not having to pass those actual test reports to construction for MnDOT jobs, you know, in the future. But, you know, those reports are being developed for both use now and also for the city and counties going forward when we need to send them test results.
Very nice, very nice. And with that, we're actually complete with our presentation. We do have some questions listed. Let's see, Rachel, can you monitor the questions and bring them forward, please?
Well, I think
they're in a couple.
Seems like one of them was they were all answered perhaps in the Q&A area. It was specifically about reporting, and if a person had read-only rights, can they see AASHTOWare reports for all projects, or do they have to be added to each project to be able to access the information? And the answer was that auditors and finance staff have been given all contract access with the roles granted, and they can run reports. You can have all contract access, which is not specific to an administrative office. And then we have another question from Gus. Is there a way to look at a quantity-based requirement and a minimum number of tests per day? For example, 1 test every 1,000 units and a minimum of 2 tests per day. I'll answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
There is a way to look at a quantity-based requirement, and separately, you can create a minimum number of tests per day. So you could set up 2 different requirements. One that would be 1 test for every 1,000 units, regardless of when it got posted. And then another one that was 2 tests every day. We have TMRs that came out of that Insufficient Material Summit that would allow for what we're referring to as stacking of your frequency types. And that would give you the ability to do this concept of 1 per 1,000, or I guess it would, in this case, maybe, well, I don't know. That's a good question. We'll have to look into how we could do something like this, but you're basically asking for stacking 1 per 1,000 and 1 per half day, or 2 per 1,000 and 2 per day. There might have to be, this is where we get into that thing that we said earlier. Some of your requirements might not fit perfectly into the framework of project, but we will come up with some way to as closely approximate them as we can. So that might be one that we can get very close to, and you might end up taking more samples than you need, but you would at least get the minimum that you needed. Good
question. We have another question just
We
popped
do.
up.
We have more.
Joe.
Will test results be distributed automatically to project staff, or will we need to monitor the system reports to get them? That's a process question that we haven't yet answered. There will likely be some distribution, and there may be the choice to leave some things not distributed, only because we don't want to inundate people with a lot of information, such as every sample that gets created and authorized for your particular project. Do you want to see a notification every time that happens, or would you like to see some kind of a summary report at the end of the day? So if you would like, again, to be part of that conversation, we would love for you to join us. If Joe is volunteering for that.
In addition, yes, monitor the system reports to get them. If you were actually looking into AASHTOWare Project itself for a sample, you could see the results too. You mentioned monitoring the system reports, but you could go right to the record as well and see it immediately. As long as you have access to that record, you could see the test results as they were being saved and entered. Any other questions, anybody? Looks like we might have a little bit of one in the chat area.
In the webinar chat?
Yeah, the webinar chat from Maria. It looks like it might be similar to a question that was asked.
Yeah, construction read-only roles see reports that have been created by someone else or run any of the reports. I think that is very similar to the one that was asked. There are, and I don't know the details of that one. That might be more of a Jenny question. Could someone?
Yeah, they can generate the reports. I wasn't quite sure of what was meant by seeing reports that others have created. So if a role can generate a report, the person who has construction read-only can generate those reports. And when we set up these read-only roles, there were you know, a bunch of people on, well, I want a bridge read-only role. I want to have a construction read-only role. But really what they want to see is the same information. So we didn't want to have to create duplicative roles with different names. So we just called it construction read-only. And it's not being able to see, you know, like the system admin or the reference data information.
And we have another question. Maria, you asked if someone can demonstrate a daily work report. And I've got to reply back. Let's see. In current MnDOT construction, to see materials, could see how it actually is used. Okay, so in the MnDOT construction environment, can you do a little demonstration of a daily work report? This is without materials incorporated. It's just so that materials can help understand the daily work report process. And that's a good idea. But before we go there, Gus has a question related to materials. Let's see if we can answer that one. And Jenny or Jessica or Nicole, would you guys be able to demonstrate the daily work report for Maria on the folks here from your environment somewhere?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Okay, so let's see here. Gus has a question of how does the system deal with a set of tests that would come from a certified plant that would be sent to multiple contracts? There are at least two different ways to handle that, Gus. One is you can have a sample record and you have multiple contracts associated to it for that material. The test done on that one sample record. Another, something else that you can do is, and another is kind of like a twist to it, is the set of tests, if you're asking about the certified plant being certified with those tests to qualify them as a plant, or if you're talking about, and I think I need to open this up for you, Gus, because I'm trying to ask you a question I know you can't answer with it being mute. Let me open it up for you here. Okay, so Gus, I have you opened up. So is your question about the test required for a certified plant? You have a sample and it goes to multiple contracts, or are you talking about like this lot of material that's going to be going out to multiple contracts?
So if we have
There
a
are
like
two
a
different answers.
yeah, if we had like a ready mix plant that is sending out concrete to 7 different contracts and they're doing the testing at the ready mix plant, the contracts will have a certain testing rate that needs to be met, and so if they're not doing the individual testing for the individual contract, they're just basically saying we sent out, you know, a certain number of yards of concrete of this type, and this is we can show we did enough tests to do that, and these are the 7 contracts that we sent it out to.
Okay, you can do that with new functionality called SMI, Source Material Identification, and Daily Source Report information for your production materials. Over there, it's some functionality that MnDOT's not using yet. They haven't put in place and still need to go through that procedure review. And when you do that, you can actually tie a sample record to it with its test to show that, hey, it's been tested, and you can even tie all the contracts to it if you'd like to. But on the daily source report SMI record, you can identify the shipments of that net inventory, where it's going to go to those contracts. So it can track that lot of that quantity of that material along as well. It's been tested. A couple different ways there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Rachel, were you going to add it all to that question? This is Maria.
No.
Okay. I guess the one thing that I wanted to add, Gus, is with all of this right now, and Rachel, you or someone else can correct me, what construction is asked for is that we do acceptance at the source instead of on the actual, I'm going to say the wrong word, materials set per se, and on the item. And so where right now, even though we are, you know, we're doing this testing and we may supply 1 project or 20 projects, it has to be accounted for in each project. And what construction would like, and what I would hope we can get to at some point, is that all they'll have to do is just check and make sure that the source has complied with all the testing requirements for the source, and not that contract had to have 2 tests on it, and this contract had to have 2 tests on it, and this contract had to have 2 tests on it. Is that, and I'm right, Rachel, in saying that we don't have the ability to do acceptance actions at a source yet, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Oh, we have another question.
We do. Okay. The question is from MIES1JOD. That question?
Yes.
Okay. I am curious about delay time in material acceptance, for example, 28-day cylinder break, and process 2. Tie this to an older DWR for material acceptance. In that scenario, that might be, hey, I need to do this 28-day cylinder break once per quantity instead of per time. So when you set up your acceptance actions requirement, you can set up 5 different ways. One is for time, which is what we went through this scenario, but another one is for quantity, which I think that's probably what that one would be taking care of. So it wouldn't matter which day you actually perform that on your DWR and record that. It's just on the sample record, and you have your test assigned for that material, for that contract item. The other 3 ways is you can also do it by the work location, by source, and also by contract. So those are the 5 different ways you can set requirements in the system for contract item materials.
I was just going to add one thing. So this was something we had talked about earlier on, and I believe there's a way that the engineer can acknowledge that the cylinder breaks are not in yet and still do some portion of the pay estimate. I'm not using all the correct terminology at this point, but there are ways that we have started talking about how we can accommodate for that. And then even more detail, which we're still once again figuring all these things out, is the way we set up the samples and the tests and everything against the items and everything. So the intent is not, and we know that we don't do that now, we don't wait for the 28-day cylinder breaks for some of the stuff that you guys do when you administer contracts.
And I opened up the talk for you. Is it maybe Jody? You can ask your question, see if it's clarified. MIES1JOD. I opened up your talk for you. Okay, yes it is. Thank you. Okay, so any other material related questions before we switch over to demonstrate a daily work report? Construction side, can you see it? Okay, all right, thank you very much. And then I'm going to hand this over to the next for a demonstration of daily work report.
Okay, so I am going to present my screen, and I had a job picked out. I'm actually going to do it in production, and I was going to let the people know that I was going to be in their contract, but let's just add something. This is an active contract. So as an inspector, I would come in and I would go to daily work reports, and I'm going to add one. And it's always going to default to today's date. It's going to put my name in here as an inspector. Got bluebird skies out there. And we had 28 this morning. Let's hope it gets to 54. That would be nice. I am going to put a remark in here. When I do stuff in production, I try to do this for I always tell people that approvals are not an exercise in clicking, but I have had a DWR that I created for testing purposes in the past with this note in there, and it still wound up getting approved. So people aren't looking at things. So I did a save, and after I did the save, more information became available here. Contract time, this is probably a working day or a completion date contract, so I don't record contract time. I have to say that there is contractors on site, and so I'm just going to pick a few, and here's all the contractors that are available. I'm going to click on Knife River, and let's just say we've got some all states. One thing about putting contractors on site is this triggers the system to want payrolls from the contractor for this day. I can put in start and end times. I can just enter hours in here. Let's do something like that, and then I'm going to click on save again. We aren't typically recording contractor equipment personnel or staff. We don't record agency staff because RCA is our system of record for our time. So postings is where we actually add quantities in there. So I'm going to select a few items to make postings. And there's a few different ways to do things. Let's clear out my filter. I can select the contractor's items. I can select by project and category. I can just type in numbers of a spec. Let's see if we have any. So when I type in 2582, it brings up my striping items. I can clear that all out. Let's do something here. Let's put some remove pipe culverts. And then let's also use my sub that I had chosen. This sub, so I can see some of his items. Oh, great, my internet connection is unstable. Let's see if we can get some of this contractor's items to show. Am I still connected?
Yes, looking good.
Okay.
I keep putting myself on mute.
Oh.
Good.
So my items aren't filtering for this particular one, but oh, there we go. So let's add in some remove bituminous pavement. And so now I can see that I selected that other item, and then I did a sort. If I click on this to selected, it's going to show me the items that I'm going to post on. Unfortunately, these are both removes. We don't have materials, so I couldn't show you any materials functionality on it anyways, but I'm going to add these in. So I'm just going to wait for them to save. And now my items are here. And so one of the things that we have done is this authorized quantity in the item header shows how many units we have for the particular project and category that we're going to be posting to. So we have contract level items and we have project level items. And so if I post that we did 6 lineal feet, well, let's just pay all 8 here. I can put my station from 15 plus 30 left and 12 to 15 plus 30 left and 4. I measured it, and this is source documentation because I made my entry directly into the system without creating other substantiating documentation. Now I can do a save now, or I can do all my entries at once. But if something were to happen, I'd lose all my work if it got if my internet connection did shut down or something. So I like to save frequently, save often. So on the previous one, I showed you how we would fill out the information on the left-hand side. I could also forgo all that, but then I'm required to put something in the right-hand side. So let's just say northbound 35. I don't know if this is correct highway or not. And 12 plus 6, 3 to, and this number isn't going to make any sense at all, square yards, and I'm going to post 4,000. I measured it. See attachment, this VW or this posting. Okay, so I'm going to click on save, and if I actually had a drawing documenting this 4,000 square yards that I have, I would come in here and I would say to find an attachment, and then I select my file wherever my attachment would be. Is that just seems to be taking a while, but that's I'm just going to cancel the upload. Oh, sure, there it shows. And then I click on save. So, and at that point, I'm just going to go back to my previous screen. And if I'm satisfied with this, I would submit it for approval. Would come in here, submit for approval. It would be the status right here would change to pending approval, and until somebody approves it, it would show up as pending approval. When they approve it, it'll change to approved. And so that is a DWR. So there's also a question is, could I also show generating an estimate? So let's go into contract progress. And payment estimates. So there's one that was done March 30th. I'm going to add a payment estimate. And you either have to change a period end date or change the type of, or reselect the type of estimate. And so we have a progress estimate. And I'm going to say to end it today. And I'm going to add this payment estimate in there. And it doesn't tell you when it's done, but if I go to contract progress payment estimate quick link, then we just wait a few minutes, hit the refresh once in a while. And just give it a minute or so. And the reason that I left that DWR in draft status is so that I could show you some estimate exceptions, but it looks like the one that was generated in the past already has some exceptions. So I'm just going to open that up in a new tab and show you what that looks like. So where we talked previously about having insufficient materials exceptions, this one has pending or draft daily work reports on it. So for some reason, there may be items that were placed but weren't included for this estimate. And if I click on this little magnifying glass, it's going to tell me Vince Kula, I'm not going to pronounce his name right. He had a DWR dated March 11th. That's the status was in draft. So any postings on that DWR were not included on this payment estimate. So the other thing that we have is overdue payrolls. So when the payrolls are more than 14 days late after they should have been submitted, it'll say overdue payrolls, and it'll show it'll have one for each contractor, and then it would list a bunch of different dates that would have so 3/9/2020. So on this particular date, we don't have a payroll for Knife River. The other one is for a different contractor for a different date. So this is Reliable Tree Service, and the DWR was the same date. So we didn't have those. So let's go back to this screen, see if our new one is generated yet. So here's my draft estimate, and they haven't recorded anything since then. And because my DWR was in draft status, the items that I had on there are also not included. So I'm guessing this was a contract that started early this spring, and we had some clearing and grubbing operations with remaining operations just a little bit later. So you want to see that, I can open that up. And it will have the same exception maybe for the, so we've got a lot of draft DWRs in there. So this is going to be one for each particular draft or pending DWR. Does anybody have any questions on that? So Gina says, I don't see, if at all, any configuration configurations, customizations on the construction component. Everything looks very generic. Is that a true observation? Well, yes, Gina, it is, because we didn't want to delete a bunch of stuff if we were going to maybe be implementing it later on. So with having to do updates and upgrades and making sure that everything gets switched over, we just left a lot of information as it was.
That was neat. Thank you. I remember that during the training sessions, you had multiple different people from different divisions in them. Like there was construction and maintenance were both in the training sessions. And that you guys pitch in for different divisions, like on heavy construction seasons or with maintenance, like with plowing snow and stuff like this. How has that worked with like using the system in AASHTOWare Project for construction for different target audiences and different roles?
It's a struggle. We've got some people that are technologically savvy and some that can barely type. And with the processes that we've used in the past, we've got a lot of people that don't want to move forward. You know, it used to be that the non-chief inspectors would hand off all their quantities to the chiefs, and the chief would do all the computer entry work. And now we want everybody getting in the system. And part of that is that we want to grow our knowledge and give our entry-level inspectors, you know, give them the knowledge that they could have to advance their careers, and just so that when we have massive retirements going on, that we don't have all the knowledge walking out the door. So that's been a bit of a struggle for us.
If there aren't any other questions, I have another question. So I remember also during the training sessions, and I've heard you use this, I think Rick too, is like with implementing construction, you're using it like as a buffet, and you have these items on the buffet, you're implementing this right now, and later on you'll add to that buffet as it grows with different choices later. How has that structure worked for construction implementation?
I think we have a lot of people that have learned more, and actually the people in the field actually teach us some of the ways that they do things or the way they think things should work, because you know we're not all knowing in central office. But some of the things, like we aren't using necessarily the stormwater stuff, and somebody else had been to another state, Ohio actually, where they're using some other program called SWIP Track, and they said that's what MnDOT should be using. Well, we're still not doing either. So you know, I don't know, it just kind of depends on which way the wind blows, which functionality we're going to be adding within the system. So
thank you. You guys are definitely unique in getting in production so quickly for such a long time before anybody else did in construction.
Yeah, it was really necessity based.
Very, very quick. Nice. It looks like we have a chat question. Let me see here. Oh, that was the one you already did. Okay. Let's see. Is there any other questions? And Maria, did that help your perspective like this for showing the daily work report? And is there anything else anybody would like to see?
Well, there's a question in the Q&A from Gus asking if Jenny could show how you would allow payment if there was an exception.
Okay, so we you know, the exceptions are out there, and we configure them to must be acknowledged, do not display or calculate, which we don't want to see, must be resolved. So the only thing that we really have out there right now that must be resolved is our funding checks, because we can't pay out more than what we've encumbered for the contract. So funding exceptions need to be addressed, so they must be resolved. So in that case, the district staff needs to encumber more money for the contract. Otherwise, everything is pretty much must be acknowledged. And we've told the engineers, you know, if they have these payroll exceptions, they need to talk with their office managers so the office managers can converse with the contractors and try to not leave all the payroll issues to the end of the contract to get resolved. The pending and draft DWRs, it's kind of just a flag that, hey, you know, the contractor might be due more money, so you might want to delete that estimate, go back and review and approve those DWRs, and then generate a new estimate. So most of them are just acknowledged because sometimes there's a legitimate reason to not have something approved.
Thank you. Maria said yes, it did help. Thank you, Maria. And thank you, Jenny, for demonstrating that for us.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any other questions?